say rejection is supposed to be the end of your story. That when someone breaks you in front of hundreds of witnesses, you're meant to disappear quietly into the shadows and never return. They expect you to accept the shame, wear it like a second skin, and fade into nothing. But I'm standing here now, and I'm going to tell you why that isn't my story. Not anymore. My name is Nariah Vale. I was once Luna to the most powerful Alpha King in the Northern Territories. I wore a crown of silver and moonstone. I walked halls lined with portraits of queens who came before me. I believed in fated mates, in the goddess-blessed bond that tied two souls together for eternity. And then my mate, Alpha King Ronan Drace, stood before the entire kingdom and called my womb a silent graveyard. Before you continue with me on this journey, I need you to do something. Please, subscribe to Ariel Romance Library. Like and share this video, and tell me where in the world you're watching from in the comments. I remember the exact moment my life shattered. It was a council meeting held in the Grand Hall, the one with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows that painted colored light across the marble floors. I sat beside Ronan on a throne that felt too big, too cold, even though I'd sat there for 3 years. The council had been whispering for months. I knew what they said behind closed doors. The Luna has failed her duty. The bloodline must continue. 3 years without an heir is 3 years too long. I had tried everything. Every healer, every remedy, every prayer to the moon goddess. My body simply would not conceive. And in a world where a Luna's worth is measured by the heirs she produces, I was becoming worthless. Ronan stood that day, his hand leaving mine for the last time. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed. He spoke to the council, to the nobles, to the pack members who filled every corner of that hall. But he didn't look at me once. After careful consideration and consultation with the elders, I have determined that Luna Nariah Vale is unable to fulfill her sacred duty to this kingdom. Her womb has proven barren, a dead end for the royal bloodline that has protected these lands for centuries. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread through the entire room. I felt the mate bond, that golden thread that had connected us since the day we met, begin to fray. It didn't snap all at once. It unraveled slowly, painfully, like pulling a thread from a tapestry until the whole thing comes undone. Therefore, Ronan continued, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed somewhere above the crowd. I hereby reject Nariah Vale as my mate and Luna. The bond between us is severed. The crown she wears no longer belongs to her. I felt it then, the bond breaking. It felt like my chest was being torn open from the inside. My wolf howled in agony, a sound only I could hear, a sound that would echo in my nightmares for years to come. The crown slipped from my head. I don't know if I let it fall or if someone removed it. Everything became a blur of pain and humiliation. The council members wouldn't meet my eyes. The pack members I'd served, protected, cared for, they all turned away as though I'd become invisible. I was escorted from the hall, not gently, not with the respect owed to someone who had been their Luna just moments before. The guards who had once bowed to me now gripped my arms and walked me through corridors I knew by heart, past rooms where I'd made decisions that affected thousands of lives, toward the gates that would close behind me forever. They gave me 1 hour to pack my belongings, 1 hour to gather 3 years of my life into a single bag. I took nothing of value. No jewelry, no fine clothes, nothing that carried the royal crest. I didn't want anything that would remind me of the woman I'd been. The woman who'd believed love could conquer tradition. The gates closed behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I stood outside the kingdom walls, alone for the first time in my life, and I realized something terrifying. I had no idea who I was without that crown. The first night of my exile, I slept under a bridge. The second night, I found an abandoned barn. The third night, it rained, and I had nowhere to go, so I just walked until my legs gave out, and I collapsed in the mud. I was broken. Completely, utterly broken. The rejection had shattered something fundamental inside me. My wolf retreated so deep within my consciousness I sometimes wondered if she'd disappeared entirely. I barely ate. I barely slept. I moved through the world like a ghost, invisible and insignificant. Months passed in a haze of pain and survival. I took odd jobs in small towns where nobody knew my face. I cleaned houses, worked in taverns, did anything that would earn me enough coin to eat. I kept my head down. I spoke to no one. I existed, but I wasn't really living. And then, Exactly 3 years after my rejection, an envelope arrived at the shabby room I was renting above a bakery. The envelope was made of thick, expensive cardstock, the kind that announced importance before you even opened it. The royal crest was embossed in gold on the front, and when I lifted it to my face, the scent hit me like a physical blow. Cedar smoke and winter rain. Ronan's scent, the scent that used to make me feel safe, cherished, loved. Now it just made me feel sick. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, written in elegant calligraphy, was an invitation. You are cordially invited to attend the pup presentation ceremony of Luna Elara Voss and Alpha King Ronan Drace. The ceremony will take place at the Royal Palace on the night of the full moon. Your presence is requested. Your presence is requested. Not invited. Requested. As though I had any obligation to attend. As though I would want to return to the place that destroyed me, just to watch my replacement celebrate the one thing I couldn't give him. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a weapon. A calculated cruelty designed to remind me of my failure, to force me to witness his triumph over my broken body. I should have burned it. I should have torn it into pieces and scattered them to the wind. I should have ignored it completely and continued with the small, quiet life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I set the invitation on my table and stared at it for 3 days straight. Because during those 3 years of exile, something had changed. I hadn't just survived, I'd transformed. And I was no longer the woman who could be discarded and forgotten. I began packing my bags. Not the desperate, hurried packing of someone fleeing. The careful, methodical packing of someone preparing for war. Because I wasn't returning to that kingdom as a ghost. I was returning as a force they never saw coming. I need to tell you how I found them. How 3 abandoned pups became my reason to keep breathing when everything inside me wanted to stop. 6 months after my rejection, I was traveling through the northern wastelands, the territories so remote that even wolves avoided them. I'd heard rumors of a healer who lived in those frozen lands, someone who might be able to help me understand why my body had failed me. I never found that healer, but I found something else. The first pup was barely alive when I discovered her. She was maybe 2 years old, left in the ruins of what must have once been a grand estate. The buildings were crumbling, covered in ice and snow, abandoned for so long that trees had started growing through the floors. She was huddled in a corner, wrapped in a torn blanket that must have been beautiful once. Her lips were blue from cold. Her breathing was shallow. When I picked her up, she was so light I thought she might disappear if I held her too tight. But even in that moment, barely clinging to life, I felt it. The power radiating from her tiny body. The ancient dominance that marked her as something extraordinary. I wrapped her in my coat and carried her to the nearest town. It took 3 days to nurse her back to health. When she finally opened her eyes, they were the pale blue of glacier ice, frostborn eyes, a bloodline everyone believed had died out generations ago. She told me her name was Saphira Dune. She told me her entire family had been killed in a territorial war, that she'd been left behind because she was too young to be worth taking. She told me all of this in a voice that didn't shake, didn't cry, just stated facts as though emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. I didn't plan to keep her. I planned to find her remaining family, to deliver her somewhere safe. But she held my hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong for someone so small, and she said, "Please don't leave me alone again." So I didn't. Saphira became mine, and I became hers. Not through blood, but through choice. Through the simple act of refusing to abandon someone the way I'd been abandoned. The second pup I found 4 months later in a fighting ring. Yes, a fighting ring. She was 4 years old and being trained to fight adult wolves for the entertainment of criminals who bet on the matches. Her name was Aveline Mora, and she was Ember Blood. I knew it the moment I saw her. The red gold eyes that glowed in the dark. The way heat seemed to shimmer around her even in the cold warehouse where they kept her caged. I bought her freedom with every coin I'd saved. It took everything I had. When they unlocked her cage, she didn't run to me. She just stood there, staring, as though she couldn't quite believe she was allowed to leave. "You're free now," I told her. She tilted her head, confused. What does free mean? It took months to help her understand. Months to teach her that she didn't have to fight to earn food, shelter, or affection. Months to convince her that I wouldn't hurt her, wouldn't sell her, wouldn't abandon her when she became inconvenient. But eventually, she smiled. And when she did, it was like watching the sun rise after years of darkness. The third pup found me. I didn't rescue Calla Riven. She rescued herself and decided I was worth following. I was traveling through Stormfang territory, lands that had been abandoned after a plague wiped out most of the pack. Calla appeared one day while I was making camp. She was 5 years old, filthy, carrying a knife that was too big for her hands, and she announced that she'd been watching me for 3 days and decided I was acceptable. Acceptable for what? I asked. For being my mother, she said, as though it was obvious. Calla was Stormfang through and through. Stubborn, fierce, wildly independent, and absolutely terrifying when she wanted to be. She had dark eyes that could see through lies and a presence that made grown wolves nervous. She stayed because she chose to stay, and I loved her because she gave me no choice but to love her. These 3 pups, abandoned by a world that saw them as inconvenient or dangerous, became my family. I raised them in secret, moving from place to place, teaching them to control their power, helping them understand the bloodlines that made them extraordinary. Saphira, with her frostborn ice and tactical mind. Aveline, with her ember blood fire and protective heart. Calla, with her Stormfang storms and unbreakable will. They were not just powerful, they were exceptional. Their bloodlines were older, purer, more legitimate than any lineage currently sitting on a throne. And as they grew, as I watched them transform from traumatized pups into confident young wolves, I realized something profound. Ronan was wrong. My womb wasn't a graveyard. My body's inability to conceive wasn't a failure. It was a redirection, because these children needed me in ways biological offspring never would have, and I needed them just as desperately. They saved me. They gave me purpose when I had none. They gave me strength when I was drowning in shame. They taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who fights beside you when the world turns dark. So when that invitation arrived, covered in Ronan's scent and dripping with malicious intent, I didn't make the decision alone. I gathered my daughters around our small table in that room above the bakery, and I showed them the embossed cardstock. "He wants to humiliate you," Saphira said immediately, her ice blue eyes narrowing with calculated anger. "He wants you to see what he thinks you failed to give him," Aveline added, flames flickering briefly in her red-gold gaze. "He wants you broken," Calla finished, her dark eyes stormy with protective fury. "Yes," I agreed, "to all of those things. But I'm not broken anymore. And I think it's time the kingdom remembered the name they tried to bury." Saphira smiled, cold and sharp as a blade. "When do we leave?" That's when I knew. I wasn't returning to witness Ronan's triumph. I was returning to rewrite my ending, and I was bringing the 3 most powerful heirs in the Northern Territories with me. The journey back to the kingdom felt surreal. Every landmark I passed stirred memories I'd tried to bury. The river where Ronan and I used to walk on summer evenings, the forest where we'd hunted together, the mountains that framed the palace in the distance, unchanged and indifferent to how much I'd changed. My daughters sensed my anxiety without me saying a word. Saphira sat beside me in the carriage, her cool hand finding mine. Aveline leaned against my other shoulder, radiating warmth and comfort. Calla sat across from us, sharpening her knife with methodical precision, a warrior preparing for battle. "If anyone tries to hurt you," Calla said without looking up, "I'll remove their tongue before they can finish the insult." "Calla," I said gently, though I appreciated the fierce loyalty. "She's not wrong," Saphira added, her voice calm but her eyes cold. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever happens in there, we face it together." Aveline squeezed my hand. "They're going to stare. They're going to whisper. Let them. We know the truth. That's what matters." I loved them so much in that moment I could barely breathe. These 3 extraordinary souls who owed me nothing but gave me everything. The gates came into view. The same gates that had closed behind me 3 years ago with such finality. The same guards who had escorted me out were still stationed there. Older now, more weathered, but their faces still held that mixture of duty and indifference. When our carriage approached, they straightened, hands moving to weapons out of instinct. But when I stepped out, when they saw my face, recognition hit them like cold water. "Luna Naraya," one of them breathed, his eyes widening. "Not Luna," I corrected gently. "Just Naraya now." But the title hung in the air anyway, a ghost that refused to disappear. The guards exchanged glances, uncertain how to proceed. I was no longer their Luna, but I had been invited. They couldn't turn me away, but they also didn't know how to welcome someone they'd helped exile. The Alpha King requested my presence, I said, handing over the invitation. I'm here to attend the ceremony. The guard took the invitation with shaking hands. He examined it as though checking for forgery, then nodded slowly. Of course, welcome back too. He trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. The gates opened. That same heavy grinding sound I remembered from 3 years ago. But this time, I walked through them with my head high and my daughters flanking me like royal sentries. The pack house loomed ahead, massive and imposing against the darkening sky. Wolves were already gathering for the ceremony, dressed in their finest clothes, laughing and celebrating. They noticed me immediately. How could they not? I walked through the courtyard with 3 young wolves radiating such intense dominance that conversations literally stopped mid-sentence. I saw shock on their faces, confusion, recognition that came slow and painful, like remembering a nightmare you'd tried to forget. Some wolves averted their eyes, shame coloring their cheeks. Others stared openly, their pity so obvious it felt like an insult all over again. But my daughters stole the attention quickly. Saphira moved with the grace of winter itself, her pale hair catching the light, her ice-blue eyes sweeping across the crowd with cool assessment. Aveline burned bright beside her, red gold eyes glowing softly, warmth and power radiating from her in waves. Kala walked with the confidence of a storm about to break, her dark eyes daring anyone to challenge us. Pack members felt their power instinctively. Wolves are built to recognize dominance, and these 3 carried it like crowns. I watched people step back without realizing they were doing it. I saw heads bow slightly, an unconscious submission to the ancient authority my daughters embodied. We entered the pack house through doors I used to walk through every day. The interior was exactly as I remembered. Same tapestries on the walls, same marble floors polished to a mirror shine, same scent of pine and cold stone. But I was different. Everything was different. An Omega approached, her eyes downcast, her hands trembling slightly. The ceremony will begin shortly. Guests are gathering in the Great Hall. I can show you to your seats. We know the way, I said softly, because I did. I'd walked these halls for 3 years. I'd known every corner, every portrait, every secret passage. The pack house might have erased me from its history, but I hadn't erased it from mine. We walked toward the Great Hall, and with every step, I felt my wolf stirring. She'd been so quiet for so long, buried under grief and shame. But now, returning to the place that had broken us, she was waking up. And she was furious. The Great Hall doors stood open. Inside, hundreds of pack members filled every available space. The room had been decorated for celebration. Flowers, candles, ribbons in silver and white. A throne sat at the front, and beside it, a smaller chair for the Luna. Above them hung a massive banner announcing the pup presentation ceremony. I stood in the doorway, and for a moment, nobody noticed. They were too busy talking, laughing, celebrating the new heir. But then someone saw me, and that person told someone else, and like a wave spreading across water, silence consumed the hall. Hundreds of pairs of eyes turned toward me. Some held shock, some held guilt, some held curiosity. A few held contempt, as though I was something distasteful that had wandered in from the cold. But I didn't flinch. I didn't lower my gaze. I walked into that hall with my daughters beside me, and the crowd parted like we were royalty. Because in a way, we were. My daughters carried bloodlines older than anyone in that room could claim. We found seats near the back. We didn't need to be at the front. Our presence alone was enough to shift the entire energy of the room. I could feel it. The nervous glances. The whispered questions. Who are those children? Where did Naraya go? Why does she look different? I settled into my chair and placed my hands in my lap, calm on the outside while my heart pounded like a war drum on the inside. My daughters sat on either side of me, protective and powerful, and I realized something profound. I was terrified, but I was also ready. Because this time, I wasn't facing humiliation alone. This time, I had family. This time, I had strength. This time, I was no longer prey. And before this night was over, everyone in this hall would understand that. Ronan entered the hall, and the room erupted in applause. He was exactly as I remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, commanding in a way that made people automatically straighten their spines. His dark hair was swept back from his face, his jaw sharp, his eyes scanning the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. He wore his ceremonial robes, black and silver with the royal crest embroidered across the chest. He looked every inch the Alpha King. Powerful, untouchable, perfect. And then his eyes found me. He froze mid-step. The smile that had been playing at his lips disappeared. For just a heartbeat, I saw genuine shock cross his face. He hadn't actually believed I would come. The invitation had been a cruelty, yes, but one he'd assumed I'd be too broken to accept. But here I was. And I wasn't broken. I was something he didn't recognize anymore. His eyes moved from me to my daughters, and I watched his wolf react. It was subtle but unmistakable. A slight widening of the eyes, a tightness in his jaw. The instinctive response of one predator recognizing others who might be stronger. Ronan recovered quickly, his expression smoothed into careful neutrality. He inclined his head toward me, a gesture that was neither warm nor hostile, just a bare acknowledgement of my presence. Then he turned away and continued toward the throne. Luna Ilera Voss entered moments later, and the applause grew louder. She was beautiful. I'd heard descriptions of her, but seeing her in person was different. She had golden hair that fell in soft waves down her back, green eyes that reminded me of spring forests, and a delicate grace that made her look like she belonged in a painting. She carried a small bundle wrapped in silver blankets. The heir. The pup I couldn't give Ronan. The proof of my failure made flesh. Ilara walked beside Ronan with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced at me once, briefly, and in that single look, I saw something I didn't expect. Not triumph, not cruelty, fear. She was afraid. They took their places at the front of the hall. Ronan stood before his throne while Ilara sat in the Luna's chair, the pup cradled in her arms. The room settled into expectant silence. Ronan began his speech. His voice filled the hall, strong and certain. Tonight, we gather to celebrate a blessing from the moon goddess. An heir has been born into the royal line, a son who will carry our legacy forward, who will protect these lands as our family has for generations. He smiled at Ilara, and the tenderness in his expression felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. He'd never looked at me like that, not once in 3 years. Luna Ilara has given me the greatest gift a mate can offer, Ronan continued. She has secured our future. She has proven herself worthy of the crown she wears. And tonight, we honor her strength, her dedication, and her love for our people. Every word was designed to hurt me. Every sentence was a comparison. Every praise for Ilara was an implicit condemnation of my failure. He spoke of legacy, of bloodlines, of the sacred duty of producing heirs. He thanked the goddess for finally answering his prayers. I sat perfectly still, my face calm, my breathing steady. But inside, my wolf was snarling. Not with jealousy, not with heartbreak, with rage at the manipulation, at the calculated cruelty of inviting me here just to twist the knife. Saphira's hand found mine under the table, her cool fingers grounding me. Aveline leaned closer, her warmth steady and comforting. Kala's eyes never left Ronan, watching him with the intensity of a predator marking prey. The speech continued. Ronan called forward elders and nobles to bless the pup. Each one approached, offering prayers and gifts, performing the traditional rituals that welcomed a new heir into the royal line. The ceremony was beautiful, meaningful, everything a pup presentation should be. And then Ronan's eyes locked on mine again. A small smile played at his lips. He'd been building to this moment. "We have a special guest tonight," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Someone who once held the title of Luna, someone who knows the weight of responsibility that comes with leadership. Naraya Vale has traveled a great distance to join us for this celebration." Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt the weight of hundreds of stares, felt the anticipation crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. "Naraya," Ronan said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Would you like to offer your blessing to the heir? After all, you understand better than anyone the importance of continuing the bloodline. It was a trap, a public execution, disguised as an invitation. He wanted me to stand up in front of everyone and congratulate him for achieving what I couldn't. He wanted me to bow my head and accept my humiliation with grace. He wanted me broken, submissive, erased. The hall held its breath. Elders leaned forward. Pack members waited. Even Alara looked at me with something like apology in her eyes, as though she understood the cruelty of what was happening but was powerless to stop it. I stood, slowly, deliberately. My daughters rose with me, synchronized and powerful, 3 pillars of ancient strength framing me like guards protecting their queen. The hall fell into a deeper silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, dangerous, like the moment before an avalanche begins. I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a broken smile. A smile that said I knew exactly what game he was playing, and I'd brought my own rules. "Thank you, Alpha King, for acknowledging my presence," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the hall. "I appreciate the invitation to witness this joyful occasion." Ronan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd expected tears, or rage, or shame, not this calm confidence. "I have indeed traveled a great distance," I continued, "and I'm glad I did, because I've brought something with me, something I believe this kingdom needs to see." I gestured to my daughters. They stepped forward, moving with such perfect synchronization that it looked choreographed, but it wasn't. It was just 3 wolves who knew each other so well that they moved as one. "Allow me to introduce Saphira Dune of the Frostborn line," I said, and Saphira inclined her head. Her ice-blue eyes swept across the crowd, and I heard gasps ripple through the room. Elders stood abruptly, their faces pale. "Aveline Mora of the Emberblood," I continued, and Aveline's red-gold eyes flashed with inner fire. More gasps, more shocked faces. Someone dropped a glass, and the sound of it shattering echoed through the silent hall. "And Calla Riven of the Stormfang line," I finished, and Calla's dark eyes promised storms to anyone foolish enough to challenge us. The hall erupted in whispers. Elders were moving toward each other, speaking in hurried, urgent tones. Pack members stared at my daughters with awe and fear, because everyone knew those names. Everyone had heard the stories of bloodlines so ancient and powerful they'd become legends. Bloodlines that were supposed to be extinct. Bloodlines that carried more legitimacy than even the royal line Ronan represented. "These 3, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos, "are my daughters, not by birth, but by choice. I found them abandoned, forgotten, left to die in the wastelands of territories your kingdom considers worthless. I raised them, I taught them, I loved them, and they loved me back." I looked directly at Ronan. Our eyes locked, and I saw the moment he understood. This wasn't just a revelation. It was a declaration of war. "So yes, Alpha King, I am happy to offer my blessing." I turned toward Alara and her pup, and my voice softened genuinely. "May your son grow strong and wise. May he learn kindness as well as power. May he never know the pain of being discarded when he's no longer convenient." Alara's eyes filled with tears. She nodded once, a tiny gesture of acknowledgement, and I knew she heard what I was really saying. I wasn't threatening the pup. I was threatening the system that would eventually destroy him too if he ever showed weakness. I turned back to the crowd. "Thank you for welcoming me tonight. It has been enlightening." Then I sat down. My daughters sat with me, and we waited to see what would happen next, because the ceremony was no longer about Ronan's triumph. It was about 3 ancient bloodlines returning from the dead, and the political earthquake that came with them. The ceremony continued, but the energy had shifted completely. Ronan tried to regain control, pushing through the remaining rituals with forced determination. But nobody was paying attention anymore. All eyes kept drifting back to my daughters, to the impossible reality of 3 extinct bloodlines sitting in their hall. Elders huddled together, whispering frantically. I caught fragments of their conversation. Ancient laws, territorial rights, lineage verification, political implications. My daughter's presence wasn't just shocking, it was legally dangerous to anyone currently holding power. When the ceremony finally concluded, pack members didn't disperse immediately. They lingered, stealing glances at us, clearly wanting to approach but uncertain if they were allowed. Some of the younger wolves looked at my daughters with open admiration. The older ones looked troubled, calculating, already planning how to use this information to their advantage. Ronan disappeared quickly, his jaw tight, his movements sharp with barely contained anger. Alara remained for a while, accepting congratulations with grace despite looking increasingly exhausted. Every few minutes, Her eyes would find mine across the room, and each time, I saw the same thing. Questions, uncertainty, fear. I was surprised when, an hour later, an Omega approached me with a quiet message. Luna Ilara requests a private audience with you, if you're willing. My daughters tensed immediately. Saphira's hand moved toward the concealed blade she always carried. Aveline's eyes flickered with protective fire. Calla stood, positioning herself between me and the Omega. It's all right, I told them gently. I'll be fine. We should come with you, Calla insisted, her voice low and dangerous. No, I said firmly. Some conversations need to happen alone. Trust me. They didn't like it, but they nodded, moving to a position where they could watch the door I would enter. My fierce, protective family. The Omega led me through familiar corridors to a small sitting room I remembered well. I'd spent countless afternoons in this room, reading or working on pack business or simply enjoying the quiet. Now it felt like visiting a museum of someone else's life. Ilara waited inside, standing by the window with her back to the door. She'd removed her ceremonial robes and changed into something simpler. Her golden hair was no longer perfectly styled. She looked younger without all the formal trappings, more vulnerable. She turned when I entered, and I saw she'd been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks blotchy. She held herself with rigid control, as though afraid she might shatter if she relaxed for even a moment. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I wasn't sure you would. Why did you ask to see me? I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Ilara laughed, but it was a bitter sound without humor. I don't know. Maybe because you're the only person in this entire kingdom who might understand what I'm feeling. She moved to sit on the couch, her movements heavy with exhaustion. She gestured for me to sit as well. I hesitated, then joined her, maintaining careful distance between us. You must hate me, Ilara said, staring at her hands. I took everything from you. Your mate, your title, your life. You didn't take anything, I corrected gently. Ronan made his choices. You were just the convenient replacement. She flinched at that word, replacement, but she didn't deny it. Do you love him? I asked, genuinely curious. Ilara was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know anymore. Maybe I never did. Maybe I just loved the idea of being chosen, of being important, of mattering to someone powerful. She looked at me, and her green eyes were full of desperate honesty. But I'm terrified, Neria. Every single day, I'm terrified. Of what? Of failing. Her hands twisted together in her lap. Of not being enough. Of making one mistake and ending up exactly where you did. She took a shaky breath. I'm pregnant again. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. Congratulations, I said, because what else could I say? Don't, Ilara said sharply. Don't pretend this is good news. I should be happy. I should be grateful. But all I can think is, what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if this pregnancy doesn't take? What happens if the pup is born weak or sick? What happens when Ronan decides I'm not producing heirs fast enough or strong enough? She was shaking now, years of suppressed fear finally breaking free. You saw how he treated you. You know what he's capable of. And if he could do that to his fated mate, someone supposedly blessed by the goddess, what will he do to me? I'm not fated to him. I'm just convenient, useful, temporary. My chest tightened with unexpected sympathy. I'd spent 3 years hating the idea of Ilara, the woman who'd taken my place. But sitting here now, looking at her fear and pain, I realized we weren't enemies. We were both victims of the same system, the same man, the same impossible expectations. Why are you telling me this? I asked softly. Ilara looked at me with raw vulnerability. Because you survived. You got out. You built something new. And I need to know if there's hope for someone like me, or if I'm just waiting for the inevitable moment when he decides I'm no longer useful. I wanted to tell her everything would be fine. I wanted to offer comfort and false promises, but I respected her too much to lie. Ronan won't change, I said honestly. The system that values women only for their ability to produce heirs won't change unless someone forces it to change. You can't fix this from the inside, Ilara. Not while you're dependent on his approval for your survival. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. I know. I've always known. I just kept hoping I was wrong. We sat in silence for a while. Two women bound by the same man, the same pain, the same impossible situation. Finally, Elara spoke again, her voice steadier now. Your daughters. They're real, aren't they? Those bloodlines. Yes, I confirmed. Very real. The elders are terrified. Ronan is furious. Do you know what you've done? I've given myself and my daughters a fighting chance, I said. I've reminded this kingdom that power doesn't only flow through official channels, and I've made it very clear that I'm not the broken woman who left here 3 years ago. Elara studied me with something like admiration. You came here to declare war? No, I corrected. I came here because I was invited. But if war is what they want, I'm prepared to fight it. She reached out tentatively and touched my hand. The gesture was brief but genuine. I hope you win, she whispered. I hope you tear down everything that hurt us both. And maybe, when you do, there will be room for women like me to breathe without constantly looking over our shoulders. I squeezed her hand gently. I'm not your enemy, Elara. I never was. I know, she said, pulling back, but I can't help you. If I'm seen supporting you, Ronan will destroy me. I have to protect my children. I understand, I said, and I did. Survival took many forms. Elara's path wasn't mine, but it was valid for her circumstances. She stood, wiping her tears away and smoothing her dress. You should leave soon. Ronan is gathering the council. They're going to demand answers about your daughters. It won't be pleasant. I'm not afraid of the council, I said, standing as well. Elara smiled sadly. No, I don't suppose you are afraid of anything anymore. She walked toward the door, then paused. Thank you. For coming. For listening. For not hating me. Thank you for being honest, I replied. She left without another word. I stood alone in that sitting room, surrounded by ghosts of my former life, and I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about destroying Ronan or reclaiming my old position. It was about ensuring no other woman would have to stand where Elara stood now, terrified and trapped and waiting for the inevitable rejection. That was worth fighting for. That was worth the war I'd just started. Chapter 6. The Council, the Bloodlines, the Threat. I returned to my daughters to find them surrounded by curious pack members. Not threateningly, but the attention was intense. Young wolves peppered them with questions about their bloodlines. Older wolves watched with calculating eyes, already plotting how to use my daughters for their own political gain. Saphira handled the attention with cool grace, answering questions with careful precision while revealing nothing important. Aveline smiled warmly, but kept people at arm's length with practiced ease. Calla looked ready to start throwing punches if anyone got too close. When they saw me, they immediately abandoned the crowd and moved to my side. Are you hurt? Calla asked, her eyes scanning me for injuries. I'm fine, I assured them. Elara wanted to talk. It was civil. Civil doesn't mean safe, Saphira pointed out, her ice blue eyes narrowed with concern. Before I could respond, a council elder approached. He was ancient, his face lined with decades of decision-making, his posture still commanding despite his age. I recognized him. Elder Thorn. He'd been one of the voices calling for my rejection 3 years ago. Naraya Vale, he said formally, his voice carrying authority. The council requests your presence immediately. There are matters of significant importance that must be addressed. What matters? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Your daughters, he said bluntly. Their bloodlines, their claims. Their very existence raises questions that demand answers. My daughters are not council business, I replied firmly. Elder Thorn's expression hardened. When they carry bloodlines thought extinct, bloodlines with ancient territorial rights, they absolutely become council business. This is not a request, Neria. It is a summons. My daughters moved closer, their dominance flaring in protective response. Several nearby wolves stumbled back, overwhelmed by the sudden wave of ancient power. Elder Thorn stood his ground, but I saw his throat work as he swallowed nervously. Fine, I said, placing calming hands on my daughter's shoulders. We'll meet with the council, but my daughters stay with me. Non-negotiable. Thorn hesitated, clearly unhappy with that condition, but nodded. Very well. Follow me. The council chamber was exactly as I remembered. A circular room with high ceilings, dominated by a massive table carved from a single piece of ancient oak. 12 chairs surrounded it, each representing one of the council elders. Ronan sat at the head in a throne-like chair that marked him as Alpha King. He looked furious. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see muscles jumping. His eyes tracked our every movement as we entered. Several council members were already present, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. We were not offered seats. Apparently, this was meant to be an interrogation, not a discussion. Elder Thorn took his place at the table. Nariah Vale, you have presented 3 individuals claiming bloodlines from the Frostborn, Emberblood, and Stormfang lines. All 3 of these lines were declared extinct over a century ago. The council requires proof of these claims. Why? I asked simply. My daughter's bloodlines are their own business. Not when those bloodlines carry ancient rights, another elder interjected. She was younger than Thorn, but no less formidable. Elder Morwen. The old laws, the ones established when these territories were first claimed, gave certain bloodlines specific territorial privileges. If your daughters truly carry these lines, their claims supersede many current territorial arrangements, including the royal claim to this kingdom, Ronan added, his voice cold and sharp. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? You appear after 3 years with 3 supposed heirs from extinct bloodlines, right when we're celebrating the birth of the legitimate heir. Legitimate, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Interesting choice of words. Are you suggesting my daughters are illegitimate? I'm suggesting they are fabrications, Ronan said bluntly. Children you've trained to play roles, to pretend power they don't possess, all so you can disrupt this kingdom out of spite. Saphira laughed. It was a cold sound, like ice cracking. You believe we are pretending? She stepped forward, and the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Frost began spreading across the stone floor, delicate patterns that grew from beneath her feet. Does this seem pretend to you, Alpha King? Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several elders stood abruptly. Even Ronan's eyes widened with shock. Aveline moved next, her red-gold eyes blazing brighter. Heat shimmered around her, and small flames danced along her fingertips. Or perhaps this is pretend. The candles in the room flared so bright they nearly went out, responding to her will. Calla simply stared at the council, and outside, thunder rumbled. The clear evening sky suddenly darkened. Wind howled against the windows. Shall I continue? She asked quietly, and her voice carried the promise of storms. The room fell into shocked silence. My daughters had just demonstrated power that couldn't be faked, couldn't be learned, could only be inherited from bloodlines so ancient they predated written history. Elder Thorn recovered first. The demonstration is impressive, but power alone does not prove lineage. We require documentation, seals, ancestral markers. I have them, I said calmly. I reached into my bag and pulled out 3 carefully wrapped packages. I'd carried these across territories, protected them with my life, knowing this moment would come. I unwrapped the first package and placed an ancient medallion on the table. It was made of ice-blue crystal that never melted, carved with symbols of the Frostborn line. This belonged to Saphira's grandmother. It responds only to direct descendants. Saphira picked it up, and the crystal glowed softly, pulsing with her heartbeat. She set it down, and the glow faded. One of the elders reached for it, and the crystal remained dark and cold. I unwrapped the second package, a ring made of metal that seemed to hold fire within it, never cooling, never burning out. Emberblood seal, passed down through generations. Aveline slipped it on her finger, and the fire within the metal blazed bright. She removed it and handed it to Elder Morwen, who examined it carefully before confirming, "This is authentic. I've seen drawings of these in the ancient archives." The third package contained a pendant carved from storm gray stone. Lightning patterns were etched into its surface, and when Calla held it, actual small arcs of electricity danced across the stone. The council examined each artifact meticulously. They consulted old texts. They performed authentication rituals. And slowly, reluctantly, they came to the same conclusion. "These are genuine," Elder Thorn finally admitted. "Your daughters carry the bloodlines they claim." Ronan's fist slammed onto the table. "This is impossible. Those lines died out. Everyone knows they died out. Everyone was wrong," I said simply. "The lines didn't die. They went into hiding. They were pushed to the edges of civilization and forgotten. But they survived, and now they've returned. Why? Elder Morwen asked, genuinely curious. Why bring them here? Why reveal them now? Because I was invited, I said, looking directly at Ronan. Because I was summoned back to this kingdom to be humiliated. Because someone wanted to remind me of my failure. So I decided to remind everyone of something else. That power doesn't only exist in official bloodlines. That strength comes in many forms. And that exiling someone doesn't mean they stop existing. Another elder, one who'd been silent until now, spoke up. The old laws are clear. Frostborn, Emberblood, and Stormfang lines held territorial rights that were never officially revoked, merely assumed extinct. If these children can prove continuous lineage, their claims are valid. Valid for what? Ronan demanded. For territorial sovereignty, the elder replied. For council representation. For, he paused significantly, potential claims to the throne itself. The room erupted. Multiple elders began speaking at once. Ronan stood, his dominance flaring, trying to regain control. But the damage was done. The possibility had been spoken aloud. My daughters weren't just powerful. They were potentially more legitimate rulers than Ronan himself. This is absurd, Ronan snarled. I am the Alpha King. My line has ruled these territories for generations. Some ancient law doesn't change that. Actually, it does, Elder Thorn said quietly. The laws established by the first pack supersede all subsequent arrangements. If these bloodlines have returned, we must acknowledge their rights. To do otherwise would violate the fundamental agreements that created this kingdom. I watched Ronan's face cycle through emotions. Rage, fear, calculation, more rage. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. The council will need time to review the historical precedents and determine the exact legal standing of these claims, Elder Morwen announced. This is not a decision to be made hastily. Of course, I agreed. Take all the time you need. My daughters and I will remain in the territory while you deliberate. No, Ronan said immediately. They leave. Tonight. This is my kingdom. Is it? Saphira asked softly, her ice-blue eyes meeting his without fear. Because the old laws suggest otherwise. Ronan moved toward her, his alpha dominance rolling off him in waves meant to force submission. My daughters didn't even flinch. They stood together, 3 ancient bloodlines united, and their combined power met his dominance with equal force. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment. Would Ronan's authority hold, or would my daughters prove stronger? Thunder cracked outside. The temperature dropped. Fire flickered in Aveline's eyes. And slowly, incrementally, Ronan's dominance weakened against their combined strength. He stepped back, and everyone in that room understood what had just happened. The Alpha King had backed down. The council will convene in 3 days to render a decision, Elder Thorn announced, his voice shaking slightly. Until then, all parties will maintain peace. No violence, no intimidation, no political maneuvering. Are we clear? Everyone nodded, though Ronan's agreement looked like it physically pained him. Good, Thorn said. This meeting is concluded. We left the chamber with our heads high. Behind us, I heard the council explode into arguments the moment we were out of earshot. Perfect. Let them fight. Let them panic. Let them realize the old order was crumbling. My daughters and I walked through the corridors, and pack members scattered before us. Word had already spread. The entire kingdom was buzzing with the news that 3 ancient bloodlines had returned, that the Luna who'd been rejected and exiled had come back stronger than anyone imagined. What happens now? Aveline asked quietly. Now, I said. We wait, and we prepare, because Ronan won't accept this quietly. The council has given us 3 days, but I suspect we'll be facing challenges much sooner. Let them come, Calla said, her dark eyes fierce. We're ready. I hugged all 3 of them, these extraordinary daughters who had given me back my strength. Yes, I agreed. We're ready. We were given rooms in the guest wing of the pack house. Not luxurious, not insulting, just functional spaces that made it clear we were visitors, not residents. My daughters wanted to stay together, so we pushed the beds into one room and created our own fortress. That night, none of us slept much. We talked about possibilities, strategies, what-if scenarios. Saphira calculated political angles. Aveline worried about pack members caught in the middle. Kala sharpened her weapons and promised violence if anyone tried to hurt us. Morning came with news that spread through the pack house like fire. The council had worked through the night. Factions were forming. Some elders supported recognizing my daughter's claims. Others stood firmly with Ronan. The kingdom was dividing before our eyes. I received messages throughout the day. Pack members asking for private meetings. Nobles trying to curry favor. Warriors offering their allegiance if we needed fighters. Everyone was scrambling to figure out which side would win, which side to support. I declined most meetings. I didn't want to build alliances based on opportunism. If people supported us, it needed to be because they believed in changing the system, not because they smelled political advantage. On the second evening, Ronan found us. We were in the garden, the one I used to walk through when I lived here. It was twilight, that liminal time when day meets night, and the world feels suspended between possibilities. He approached alone, which was either brave or foolish. My daughters immediately positioned themselves between us, but I touched their shoulders gently. "Give us a moment," I said softly. They didn't like it, but they moved back slightly, far enough to give us space but close enough to intervene if needed. Ronan and I stood facing each other for the first time in 3 years, without an audience, without performance, just two people who used to mean everything to each other and now meant nothing. "You've caused chaos," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You invited me," I countered. "This is what happens when you underestimate people you've tried to destroy." "I should have known you wouldn't come quietly," he admitted. "You were always stubborn." "I was loyal," I corrected. "There's a difference. I gave you everything I had. I served this pack faithfully. I loved you completely, and you discarded me the moment I couldn't produce an heir on your timeline. The kingdom needed a leader who valued people as more than breeding stock," I interrupted. "But you were too obsessed with legacy to see that." Ronan's jaw clenched. "Those children of yours, they're dangerous. Their presence threatens everything I've built." "Good," I said simply. "Maybe what you built deserves to be threatened. Maybe a kingdom that discards women for biological circumstances they can't control isn't worth preserving." "This isn't about you anymore, Nerea," Ronan said, stepping closer. "This is about 3 ancient bloodlines suddenly appearing, with the potential to tear apart carefully maintained peace. This is about political instability that could lead to war. This is about chaos." "Then maybe there should be chaos," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Maybe comfortable peace built on suffering isn't really peace at all." He stared at me, and for just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or recognition of what he'd lost. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by cold determination. "The council will rule against you," he said. "I've made sure of it. Your daughters will be denied their territorial claims. They'll be classified as displaced refugees with no political standing. And you'll leave this kingdom with nothing, just like before." "You're that afraid of them?" I asked, genuinely curious. 3 young wolves who never wanted your throne, who only came here because I was invited. They scare you that much?" "They're not children," Ronan said harshly. "They're weapons, and you've aimed them directly at everything I've built. So yes, I'm concerned. And yes, I will do whatever necessary to protect my kingdom." "Your kingdom," I repeated. "Not our kingdom. Not the pack's kingdom. Yours." "That's always been the problem, Ronan. You see ruling as ownership instead of service. And you see ruling as what? Some noble calling?" He laughed bitterly. "You were Luna for 3 years, Nerea. You know the weight of these decisions. You know the impossible choices, the compromises, the sacrifices. Don't pretend you're above it all just because you got pushed out." "I don't pretend to be above anything," I said quietly. "But I learned something during my exile. I learned that power without compassion is just cruelty with a crown. I learned that traditions that hurt people should be changed, not preserved. And I learned that being broken and rebuilding yourself makes you stronger than never being challenged at all." Ronan looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Maybe I was. Maybe the woman I'd become was so different from the woman he'd rejected that we truly couldn't understand each other anymore. "You should leave before the council rules," he said finally. "Take your daughters and go. Build your life somewhere else. Stop trying to destroy mine." "I'm not trying to destroy anything," I said honestly. "I'm trying to make sure no other woman stands where I stood 3 years ago. feeling worthless because her body wouldn't cooperate with political demands. I'm trying to make sure my daughters have a world where their worth isn't measured only by their usefulness to men in power. Noble goals, Ronan said coldly. But you've chosen a dangerous way to pursue them. War is coming, Naraya. The council is split. Packs are choosing sides. What you've started won't end peacefully. Then I'll fight, I said simply. Because some things are worth fighting for. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw the exact second he gave up trying to reason with me. His expression hardened into something cold and final. So be it. But don't say I didn't warn you. He turned to leave, and I called after him. Ronan? He paused, looking back. Alara is terrified of you, I said quietly. She's pregnant again, and scared that any mistake will make you reject her the way you rejected me. Is that really the legacy you want? Being the king that women fear instead of respect? Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Shame. But he buried it quickly. Stay out of my family, Naraya. You don't get to have opinions about my mate. She asked to speak with me, I corrected. Because she needed someone who understood. That should tell you something about the kingdom you've created. Ronan left without another word, his footsteps echoing through the garden. My daughters immediately surrounded me. Are you okay? Aveline asked, her red gold eyes searching my face. I'm fine, I assured them. That was a conversation that needed to happen. He threatened us, Saphira observed calmly. He's going to manipulate the council ruling. Probably, I agreed. But we knew this wouldn't be easy. We knew coming here would start something bigger than just confronting my past. What do we do now? Kala asked. I looked at each of my daughters, these brave, powerful young wolves who had trusted me enough to walk into this chaos. Now we wait for the council's decision. And whatever they rule, we face it together. If they recognize your claims, we'll have won a major political victory. If they don't, we'll find another way to change things. We could just leave, Aveline suggested hesitantly. Go back to our life. Forget all this. We could, I agreed. But is that what you want? She was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. No. I want other displaced wolves to have homes. I want abandoned pups to be protected. I want a world where your story doesn't keep happening. Then we stay, I said firmly. We stay and we fight for that world. That night, the pack house was restless. Wolves prowled the hallways. Arguments echoed from various rooms. The tension was thick enough to taste, everyone waiting for the council's decision that would shape the kingdom's future. I stood at my window, looking out over lands I used to call home, and I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The rejection, the exile, the years of survival, finding my daughters, building a family from broken pieces, and finally, returning not as a victim but as a challenge to the system that broke me. Tomorrow, the council would rule. Tomorrow, we would know if ancient laws still held power, or if Ronan's influence had buried them. Tomorrow, everything would change one way or another. But tonight, I had my daughters. I had my strength. I had my purpose. And that was enough. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The woman who had been rejected and exiled was gone. In her place stood someone stronger. Someone who had learned that family isn't about blood, that power isn't about titles, and that sometimes the only way to change a broken system is to break it completely and build something better from the ruins. The moon rose full and bright over the kingdom. In wolf culture, full moons meant transformation, revelation, destiny. Tomorrow, under this moon's light, we would discover which path destiny had chosen for us. But regardless of what the council decided, one thing was certain. I had already won, because I'd survived. I'd rebuilt. I'd found love and purpose and strength in places I never expected. And no ruling, no rejection, no exile could take that away from me. This wasn't the end of my story. It was barely the beginning, and I was finally ready to write the rest of it on my own terms. The kingdom held its breath. Tomorrow, war might come, or peace, or something entirely unexpected. But whatever happened, it would happen to a woman who was no longer afraid, who was no longer broken, who had 3 powerful daughters standing beside her and an unshakable belief that change was not only possible but necessary. I closed the curtains and turned back to my daughters. They were talking quietly, planning strategies, preparing for every possibility. They caught me watching and smiled, these three extraordinary souls who had saved me as much as I'd saved them. Get some rest, I told them gently. Tomorrow, we change the world. They nodded, settling into their beds with the easy confidence of young wolves who had survived worse than political machinations. I lay down as well, and for the first time in 3 years, I slept peacefully in the kingdom that had once destroyed me, because I was no longer the woman who could be destroyed. I was the woman who had risen from the grave they'd buried me in. And tomorrow, everyone would understand exactly what that meant. If you've made it this far with me, through rejection and exile, through pain and rebuilding, through the return and the confrontation, then you've taken a journey that required courage. Stories like this aren't easy to hear because they touch on wounds many of us carry, but they're important, because they remind us that rejection isn't the end, that being discarded doesn't define us, that sometimes the people who break us are doing us a favor, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. Naraya's story isn't over. The council's decision, the political war, the confrontation with systems that value women only for their biological usefulness, all of that is still coming. But you've seen the foundation. You've seen a woman rise from absolute destruction to become something powerful, something dangerous, something unstoppable. If you want to follow the rest of this journey, if you want to see what happens when 3 ancient bloodlines challenge a corrupt throne, if you want to witness a system built on cruelty finally face consequences, then subscribe to Ariel Romance Library right now. We tell stories about broken women becoming legends. We tell stories about families built from choice instead of blood. We tell stories about systems that deserve to be challenged, and women who are brave enough to challenge them. This is your safe place for every heartbreak, every uprising, every moment when someone who is supposed to stay broken decides to become powerful instead. Subscribe now, because Naraya's war is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Thank you for traveling with me through this story. Thank you for having the courage to sit with difficult emotions. Thank you for believing that rejection can be a beginning instead of an ending.